Hello, lovelies, and welcome back. Or if you're new here, hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Lex Carline, and this is Seriously Now. First of all, Happy New Year! I hope you all had a wonderful festive period. What did you get up to? Let me know. So I went up to my mum's for a couple of days for Christmas with my daughter, which was, well, went better than expected actually, with 3 Labradors who are all related, a terrier that thinks he's bigger than everyone, and a 5-year-old that thinks she's the boss. Yeah, it could have gone south, but actually it was really lovely. And it was so nice that Mum even invited us back for New Year. Don't know whether she'll be doing that next year. So, 2024, the start of a new year. Anybody made any resolutions? No? Yes? If you have, let me know. I haven't set anything in stone this year because I'm pretty rubbish at keeping them. But hey, it's lovely to have you all here with me, so thank you. Tell you what, why don't we just see how far we can grow the Seriously Now family this year? I think that's a good resolution. So, on that note, if you wonderful people out there could like, comment, share and subscribe wherever possible, that would really, really help me and it would mean the absolute world, so thank you in advance. So for the first episode this year, we are going seriously witchy. Yep, you may have guessed that by the title of the episode. So yes, we're going to talk about the North Berwick witch trials in Scotland. And Snoobs, this one's for you. So, without further ado, let's jump in, shall we? Now, North Berwick is a sleepy, small fishing town on the coast of East Lothian to the east of Edinburgh. But despite being such a little place, it has quite a few claims to fame. The inspiration for Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island was the island of Fidra, which can be seen from the North Beach. It is home to the Bass Rock famous Seabird Nature Reserve, and it was also recently named the best place to live in Scotland by the Sunday Times. And obviously, of course, as we're here today, it was home to some of the most horrific witch trials Scotland would see, which in themselves were said to partly inspire Shakespeare's Macbeth. The use of weather is obviously used throughout Macbeth with lines such as, "When shall we meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain?" A reference to the North Sea journey we'll talk about maybe. In June of 1963, Scotland passed the Witchcraft Act, and this meant that anyone caught using witchcraft, sorcery, or necromancy, or even just consulting with witches, was committing a capital offence. This act would cost thousands their lives over the next century and a half, and it called for the penalty of death if you were found guilty. So the North Berwick witch trials were the first major witch trials in Scotland, but the events leading to their origin actually started across the North Sea. On October the 22nd, 1589, King of Scotland James VI set sail for Norway, and he was heading there to collect his new bride, Anne of Denmark. And a quick little fun fact about King James before we go into the rest, he was actually an advocate for not smoking, even way back then. Now, when James, who was 23, first decided to marry Anne, who was only 14 at the time, yes, ew, but different times, we're back in the old enough to bleed, old enough to breed era. So the wedding was arranged, but James had a proxy stand in his place. Imagine that happening today. How bizarre. One can't be bothered to attend one's wedding. One will send someone else. So Anne attempted to cross the sea to be with her new husband, but some severe storms actually prevented her, and this marooned her in Norway, which is why he was going to Norway, because then all of a sudden he decided that, yes, actually I will join my new bride. Why he couldn't have done that in the first place? But, elites. So, once James got to Norway, as it would happen, the couple would have a second wedding ceremony. So this time he was actually there. And then after this, the couple decided it was time to head home to Scotland. But another storm plagued their journey. Now in Denmark, the witch trials had actually already begun, and James paid attention to this. So on their first attempted return journey, there was what was called a great sea tempest, or a violent windy storm, and the travellers actually had to return to port for fear of being capsized, and a hysterical Danish admiral suggested it was the result of witchcraft, So naturally, the king was inclined to believe him. This was then exacerbated to witches in East Lothian had conspired to cause the horrendous weather that had threatened both James and his new child bride's lives. Always a possibility, I suppose. The first woman accused, in the North Berwick trials anyway, was actually teenage maidservant Gellis Duncan. She worked for a man named David Seaton. He was a bailiff and also representative to the local estate owner, Lord Seaton, in Tranent. And he felt that because Gellis was just so young and so uneducated that she was far too talented as a healer, for his liking anyway. He said she possessed what was a knack for alleviating pain and suffering of people with allegedly incurable diseases. So, because she was good at her job, she must be a witch. Ah, the logic of yesteryear. Wonderful. And Seaton also decided that Gellis had been sneaking out of the house at night, although her supposed whereabouts remain unknown. He began to suspect that she was linked to the North Sea storms that had threatened the king and queen's lives, and by 1590 he couldn't hold back his suspicions and took Gellis in for interrogation. Now remember, witchcraft had been illegal in Britain since 1563, but the paranoia had been growing. And obviously it was helped in part by King James's newfound interest, and after the perilous journey in the North Sea, James was obsessed with prosecuting those suspected of colluding with the devil. Which, yes, then witches were only in collusion with the devil. Couldn't be good. Tossers. Now, despite horrendous torture, which included the use of pillywinks, and pillywinks, yes, it sounds like a really cool name, but it's actually a device used to crush fingers. You put your fingers in the holes, and then somebody else just screws it tighter and tighter and tighter to squash and flatten. No, thank you. But anyway, Gellis remained silent. So Seaton quickly ran out of patience, or possibly ways to torture the poor girl. So he had her stripped naked, shaved, and then subjected to a full body examination. And this is when he allegedly found Gellis's devil mark on her throat. Although why she needed stripping and shaving if it was on her throat? Prick. Now a devil's mark, thank you Google, was a variety of skin lesions described as flat or raised, red, blue or brown, sometimes with unusual outlines. And we know now that they were more than likely extra nipples. But it was believed that familiars, or agents of the devil, believed to gain sustenance from these marks, and they usually appear in animal form. Nowadays, witches are allowed to have familiars without them being linked to the devil. So, upon the discovery of her mark, Gellis sang like the proverbial canary. She not only admitted to practicing witchcraft, but also named many, many others, some say as many as 60, and a few of whom we will look at today. And this is what ignited the Berwick witch trials. Gellis also admitted to attending a meeting of over 200 witches in the Kirk of North Berwick on Halloween, and that the devil himself had been there. On the day of her execution, however, Gellis tried to protest her innocence. She stated that David Seaton had obtained her confession due to the extreme torture, which, surprise, surprise, they didn't believe her. And she was executed on the 4th of December 1591 at Castle Hill in Edinburgh. Now, one of the alleged witches named by Gellis was Agnes Sampson, and she was said to be, quote, the oldest witch of all dwelling in Haddington. Agnes was a local healer and midwife, and she'd successfully healed many of her neighbours' ailments. She was a widow who lived on the poverty line with her children. Now, given that Agnes was such a talented healer, because one assumes that, like Gellis, this was her downfall, Agnes had actually been investigated for witchcraft before. So it was no surprise locally that her name was given. But poor Agnes was left to protest her innocence again. She was also stripped, shaved, and her entire body was thrown, or constricted, with a rope. So I'd take that as she was tied up. Agnes's devil mark was actually said to be found on her privates. And once again, after the discovery of the mark, the woman sang like a canary. and in Agnes's case, the canary to end all canaries. She allegedly confessed to causing a sudden storm on the Forth, which is a Scottish river, on the 7th of September 1589, which caused 2 ferry boats to collide, and local woman Jane Kennedy drowned as a result. Agnes also confessed to making a charm by sinking a dead cat. Not only that, but her companions had attached parts of a dead man to the cat. Nice. As if messing with the dead cat wasn't bad enough, you gotta stick something. Yeah, lovely. It was sunk in the sea near Leith, and this is said to be the charm that conjured the storm that threatened the king and his new queen from Denmark. Agnes also used the phrase a contrary wind, which in itself is not uncommon for voyage correspondence, but Agnes had used it in a specific sense. Agnes Sampson had said that the ship carrying the king and his wife experienced a contrary wind to the rest of the ships, and being in the company of the king, James acknowledged that this was most strange and true. The rest of the ships had fair and good wind. Then was the wind contrary and altogether against his majesty. The rest of the king's fleet were actually able to sail ahead, and only his ship was driven back. Allegedly. So in December of 1590, English ambassador Robert Bowes wrote that Agnes had indeed confessed her witchcraft to the king, and also that there had been many attempts made to steal the king's personal linen to work spells upon him. Because magic works better with personal effects. Agnes also later confessed, allegedly, that the devil had offered to help not only her, but her children also, as they were so poor. And he appeared either as a man in black, a dog, or a haystack. As you do. She admitted attending a witches' convent at North Berwick with her son-in-law. Together they collected bones and powdered them for charms against the pains of childbirth. Now, that seems more helpful than not, childbirth. Slightly uncomfortable, so crushing some bones to help? Yes, please. Now, interestingly, Agnes said of Bowes that he was a little and fat man with black hair, and that he had actually given her gold to make a charm with a toad to hurt the king and make the king infertile. But Bowes noted that this personal description was inaccurate. Of course. Agnes also claimed to have made a wax image of her father-in-law for a woman who complained about his behaviour. But to really cement her status as a witch, Agnes is said to have relayed to the king the words that he and his wife Anne shared on their wedding night in Oslo. Words the king was said to have confirmed, and it was something that she should absolutely not have known. On the 27th of January 1591, Agnes Sampson was officially charged with witchcraft, and there were 53 points on her indictment. Just the very next day, she was garroted, strangled, and then burnt at the stake on Castle Hill. One of the many that Agnes was said to have cured of illness was John Duncan from Musselburgh. In 1614, his widow Gellis Johnston, another Gellis, was accused of witchcraft. The charges against her included consulting with Annie Sampson for her husband's care. So, in looking for help for her husband, who was poorly, she went to a healer, and then she gets accused of witchcraft. Wonderful. Makes you inclined to not want to help anyone, doesn't it? Now, Agnes's naked and bold ghost is said to still roam the palace of Holyrood House, which I know ghosts are quite interesting to see anyway on the rare occasion, but naked and bold because she'd been shaved? Because I can't imagine it was a clean shave. That's got to be an interesting looking ghost. Now then, it wasn't only common folk who were accused of witchcraft. Oh no. The rich and educated were not immune either. Euphemie McAlzine, or more commonly known as Effie, was a wealthy heiress and a member of the gentry. So the gentry is the class of people directly below the nobility by both birth and position. She was, however, born out of wedlock, very scandalous, but her birth was then recognised as legitimate in November 1558, and she was only believed to have been born shortly before that, but we don't have an exact date on that one. Her marriage was said to be an unhappy one, and she allegedly tried to poison her husband less than a year in. Oh. Now, although her husband was said to have broken out all over in spots, he did make a full recovery. Sorry if you can hear my chair creaking. The couple would go on to have 5 children. The birth of her boys, who sadly both died in infancy, were particularly difficult, so she sent her nurse to get help in relieving her pain and the discomforts of childbirth. And she sent her to a well-established midwife, one Agnes Sampson. Now, Effie would later inherit, as the sole heir, all of her father's estate. Now, this caused friction in the family, and she often battled them, especially her uncle Henry, who had assumed that, as the late man's brother, he would inherit it all. Now, there were further problems with her in-laws. One David Seaton. Remember that name? Well, he was Effie's brother-in-law, married to her husband Patrick's sister, Catherine. So when Effie's mother-in-law died, she left Effie and Patrick 3,400 merks and only 560 to David and Catherine. Now, Effie and Patrick were already very well off, but David and Catherine were always in severe financial difficulties. So that obviously drove a big wedge. Although Gellis initially implicated Effie, she wasn't mentioned officially until Agnes Sampson's pre-trial exam in January of 1591. At the end of January, there were statements taken from several people, including some of Effie's servants, and they claimed that she had been present at witch gatherings in both Asheson's Haven and North Berwick the year before. Others, including Gellis, alleged that Effie had held a wax image of King James at one of the meets, and while doing so hinted that a new sovereign would be the Earl of Bothwell, someone she had close connections to. Now, Effie was present when the statements were transcribed, and she vehemently denied the allegations. Effie was also accused of being part of the plot to sink King James's ship, and that she and others had killed the Earl of Agnes with witchcraft, and also that she had actually caused the deaths of her husband, father-in-law, and some of the extended family. Not only that, but she was also said to have caused the death of her cousin and nephew after arguing with Uncle Henry about the land ownership. So, unsurprisingly, Effie was found guilty. Now, on June 25th, 1591 at Castle Hill, Effie was burnt alive. Yep. The fire was built with materials the town council had provided for the execution of Barbara Napier, which had been deferred. Burnt alive. I don't know why they didn't strangle her first like they had done previously, but that's a horrific way to go. And only because somebody else's execution had been deferred. But that does take us nicely on to our next witch. So Barbara Napier was lady-in-waiting to the Countess of Angus, Jean Lyon, until they had a series of disagreements. Now, a lady-in-waiting was a female personal assistant at a court, attending on a royal woman or a high-ranking noblewoman. And historically in Europe, a lady-in-waiting was often a noblewoman herself, but of a lower ranking than the woman she served. And Barbara, like Effie, had also inherited her father and husband's lands after they died without a male heir. Gellis Duncan accused Barbara of being the witch that had actually caused the fatal illness of Archibald Douglas, the 8th Earl of Angus. He reportedly died of a disease so strange there could be no remedy, and witches allegedly caused his death from sweating and fever by toasting a wax image of him by a fire. Effie was also accused of being part of the plot to kill King James. As well as that, it was said that she brought charms to help her own health and her relationship with the Countess of Angus after their disagreements. She allegedly went to Agnes Sampson in hopes that she could help with the Countess's morning sickness, and she is said to have received a charmed ring to help the Countess look upon her favourably. She was also said to have consulted with Agnes regarding the well-being of her spouse and her children, and also Richie Graham, a magician, specifically regarding her son's health. Barbara was found guilty of consulting with witches, for which the punishment was death, but it had yet to be invoked for that reason. She was notably cleared of the charge of being present at a witches' convention. Unfortunately, capital punishment was the fate set for Barbara Napier, and on the 10th of May, 1591, she was to be strangled and then burned. But she claimed she was pregnant, and as such, gained a stay of execution. Now, if it's not true, it's very clever. Now, Barbara's fate is actually unclear. Now, we know in June of 1591 she was alive and more than likely incarcerated. Snoring Labrador, sorry. One court record says that she was actually executed on the day of her trial, although the sentence was not issued until the 10th of May, but she may have been executed in the second half of 1591 with 5 others. But then Burr records in Edinburgh say that she may have been imprisoned until the 23rd of February 1592, which is around the length of time of her claimed pregnancy, when her brother posted bail for her. Now, I'm presuming that her mother had had another child, either before she married Barbara's father. I'm presuming because I couldn't find anything, and obviously we know that her father had no sons, which is why she inherited the land. Now we're going to pop back to Gellis for a second, because on the day of her execution, and also another that she had named Bessie Thompson, as well as trying to recant their statements that they were witches, they also made statements recanting their accusations of both Barbara and Effie. They were both asked why they had initially lied, and both stated that they had been forced into it, because, torture can do that, by David Seaton, his son, and others not named. Fancy that. A broke man with a vendetta. Glad times have changed. But yes, so we don't really know what happened to Barbara, but here's hoping she got away with it. And so this brings us to the final individual we're going to talk about today, and that is John Fian. In some places I see him referred to as Dr. John Fian, and he was a teacher in Prestonpans, and also allegedly a sorcerer. Accused of bewitching the people of the town, preaching witchcraft, and that he was part of the same coven as Agnes Sampson that raised storms to kill the king. John Fian was another one caught because of the confessions of Gellis Duncan. He was said to openly admit to bewitching a man to fall into fits of lunacy once a day. So in order to verify this, Fian actually brought the same man before the king in his chambers on Christmas Eve, 1590. There, he reportedly bewitched the man again, and this made the man scream, contort himself, and jump high enough to touch the chambers of the roof in a hysterical fit. Probably quite the entertainment. This was said to last for an hour, and after it finished, the man apparently had absolutely no memory of it, like he'd been asleep the whole time. Surely if you've been throwing yourself around and contorting yourself, you could at least be a little bit sore and be wondering, okay, ow, why, ow? During his trial examination, Fian confessed that he had in fact made a pact with the devil, but he promised that he would renounce Satan and vowed to live his life as a Christian. The next day, he said that the devil had come to his cell the previous night, dressed all in black with a white wand, and Fian said that Satan demanded he continued his faithful service as per the first oath of their agreement. Now, Fian claimed to have renounced the devil by saying, directly to the devil's face, "Avoided, Satan, avoided, for I have listened too much to thee, and by the same thou hast undone me, in respect whereof I utterly forsake you." And the devil allegedly replied with, "That once ere thou die, thou shalt be mine," then broke his white wand and immediately vanished. There is a possibility that Fian did talk to the devil. Methinks one is putting on a show to save one's own arse, though, and don't blame me. Not a bad card to play. So Fian was actually given a chance to lead the life that he had promised. But instead, he stole a key to his cell and escaped. Run, Forrest, run! Sadly, Fian would eventually be captured and then tortured until his execution. Brace yourselves. The torture that Fian endured included having his fingernails ripped off and then iron pins rammed into the wounds, the pillywinks, and also the boot. Now, the boot was used to crush your feet until they were so small they were of no use. I mean, they were creative with their torture, weren't they, back in the day? But Fian was reported to have shown no pain during his torture, which is impressive if true. Don't give those abusers satisfaction. On the day of his execution, Fian also denied his confession, stating that he, like the others, had only told those tales by fear of torture and to save his life. He was then executed the same day as Agnes Sampson, the 27th of January 1591, on Castle Hill, Edinburgh. And he was placed in a cart, strangled, then burnt. This same fate would befall many, many more. In the 2 years that they ran, the Berwick witch trials saw between 70 and 100 people put on trial, tortured, and executed from this one small place alone. In fact, Scotland in total was said to have seen about 4,000 people burned at the stake during all of their witch trials. Which, considering how big Scotland isn't, that's an enormous number of people. I mean, it's an enormous number of people anyway, don't get me wrong, but when you put it in relation to the size and population of Scotland, that's insane. I would like to say I'm glad nothing like this happens in the world anymore. But we know that would be a lie, sadly. Humanity needs to do a lot better. Oh, there's something for 2024. Humanity, do better, be better. Thank you. So if you made it this far, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please let me know your thoughts. And if you have any content suggestions, general feedback, your seriously you stories of the weird and wonderful, it's seriouslynowpod@gmail.com. And of course, you can find me on all the socials at seriouslynowpod. Next week, we are off to Gloucester to talk about a couple, well, that will probably live on in true crime infamy. Yes, we are going to Cromwell Street with Fred and Rose West. So until then, lovelies, stay safe, stay free, and stay weird. Bye-bye.